Okay, this is a video introduction to Epoch number 2 for the U.S. History 2 class. We finished off Epoch 1, and it ended in kind of, if you noticed, it ended in a real crescendo with that economic catastrophe of the 1890s. Well, Epoch 2 kind of picks up after that, and I just wanted to say a few words about it and about how the quizzes are going, and about in general where we are in the class now as we're entering into week 5. Now, where Epoch 2 takes us is Epoch 2 is going to take us from roughly the economic catastrophe of 1893. Really, we're going to start off with, as I mentioned in the lectures, progressivism gradually built up over the latter part of the 19th century, particularly in the 1880s and beyond. By 1890, they had formed themselves into kind of a populist party, and one of the things we talked about, or I talked about in the lectures, was the idea that you had all of these splinter groups, all of which were basically single-issue groups, that kind of coalesced together into what would become the Populist Party, which is not very long-lived. The Populist Party doesn't live very long, and I'll explain why when we get into the lectures and the Epoch themselves. But by the 1890s, they're a viable political force, and with the catastrophe of 1893, which we talked about at great length in the first Epoch, it gives them, it kind of discredits the conservatives that had been in power in the latter 19th century and gives rise to these progressives. And so what we start Epoch 2 with is the rise of the progressives. We talked about the development of progressivism, but now it's an actual political force. And so we're going to see them as they take over the political process, or as they come into their own in the political process, up really through Woodrow Wilson, 1919, 1920. And I'll get into the lectures why it is that they fall out of favor. It's got a number of different issues, among them being the Bolshevik Revolution during this period of time. We're going to see the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. And progressivism will largely be associated, for good reasons, with socialism. And socialism, of course, is one step from communism, and so it will become a fear. It'll be the first Red Scare, which we'll talk about. So we basically look from really Theodore Roosevelt, who's the first of the progressive presidents, really, up through Woodrow Wilson. That's going to be 2.1. Now, 2.2 is going to be the development of the American empire. Okay, we're going to look at the foundation of the empire itself. Before one can move forward aggressively in empire, one first has to develop the wherewithal. We studied a lot of that in Epoch 1. We looked at the development of the economy, the strengthening of the economy, American prosperity, etc. Now we're gonna see in 2.2 how this moves forward, and what we're going to find out is that once again the great myth that is often perpetuated in history classes is that the United States was isolationists up until really the First World War, which of course is untrue. Particularly during this period, what we're going to see is that the United States pursues a very aggressive foreign policy. Now, we talked about it at some length in Epoch 1, with them pursuing an aggressive foreign policy towards the Indians. Of course, we know from just our basic knowledge of history. Well, what we're going to see is that they actually have a very aggressive foreign policy towards Latin America, Central America, and most particularly, and most unknown, Asia. The United States wants to get into China. China at the time, by the early 19th century, or mid-19th century, is carved up into spheres of influence for all the European powers. So the United States is blocked out. And so what the United States pursues is what's called an open door policy. Well, in order for the United States to be able to project forward into Asia, they need essentially staging areas, refueling areas across the Pacific Ocean. This is long before we have the advent of diesel fuel. We're dealing with coal-operated engines in ships. So the United States needs stepping stones to progress across the Pacific. one of which will be Midway Island, one of which will be Hawaii. In the Spanish-American War, they'll take Guam and the Philippines, and the Philippines will become the final staging area. Now, the problem that we're going to see with this more aggressive, assertive foreign policy by the United States in the Pacific towards Asia is that at the same time the United States is doing this, the Japanese Empire is developing. Okay, and the Japanese Empire is building an industrial base in the late 19th century, right around the time the United States is. We'll see two conflicts with the Japanese. We'll see the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, both of which the Japanese are successful, and so the Japanese really come on the stage as a player, and of course this will put the United States and the Japanese in a collision course really as early as the late 1890s or early 20th century. We'll put them into a collision course which will culminate with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in the Second World War in the Pacific. Although, of course, World War II begins in the Pacific a little before then with the Japanese occupation of Manchuria and latter invasion of China. And so that's 2.2. Now, 2.3 is going to be the First World War, the United States entry into the First World War. I'll have a little bit of background information about the war itself. Then we'll study and look at the United States' involvement in the war, what was involved in that, what brought the United States in the war. Prior to the war, public opinion in the United States was overwhelmingly opposed towards intervention in what the United States Americans felt was ostensibly a European affair. And so we'll see World War I and some of its aftermath, and then in 2.4, we'll look at the roaring 1920s, which of course is one of the most interesting of all the periods, because among other things what you'll have in the 1920s is the advent of prohibition. And of course what prohibition brings with it is bootleggers and organized crime, and this is the time of the great famous gangsters. So it's just a great time in American history. That's going to be one of the things you mentioned. The main focus of what we look at is going to be the economy, okay? And we'll look at what happens. And just to cut to a nutshell real quickly in this video, and we'll go over it at great length in the lectures. During World War I, the United States productivity tops out. It peaks, okay? Because they become the arsenal and breadbasket for democracies, for Britain, France, and actually even Russia, okay? Well, after the war, after a short period, about a year and a half or so, for Europe to rebuild itself, demand for American products is going to collapse. Okay? Well, during the war, all of the producers, both agricultural and industrial, all of the producers massively increased their productive capacity. They did so through borrowed money. Okay? Well, after the war, demand collapses. They don't need this productive capacity. They have a lot of, they're over-leveraged in terms of debt. They don't have any kind of demand for their increased production, and so the economy is going to go into a recession. And the problem, of course, is how to prevent the circumstance of 1893 from happening again. And we'll look at that at great length. Okay, so that's 2.3 and 2.4. Now, the United States is able to keep it going during the 1920s, and it's one of the great misunderstood things is that people often look at the 1920s as a period of great prosperity, which of course it was. Through the decade, you had overall 40% growth in American production. Okay, to the layman looking at this, they would think, "Oh, well, that's great. That's a boom economy." Yes and no. And there's a similarity between what happens in the 1920s and what will later happen in the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century. Yes, there's growth. But there's growth because the government, okay, at this time the Federal Reserve is now in place, pursues a loose monetary policy. So they make loans readily available. The difference is that the panic in 1893, the economic crisis in 1893, was largely spurred on because of the strain placed on the credit system from commercial expansion, industrial and agricultural commercial expansion, meaning supply side. Okay, so we have supply side. Well, in the 1920s, it's going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be supply side that places the demand on it or places the strain on the credit system. It's going to be the demand side. Okay, what they're going to do for the first time in American history in the 1920s is make available credit to your average American Joe Schmo. Okay, who's going to go out and buy all kinds of things. So it's a consumerism that takes over in the 1920s. Well, the problem is eventually these bills come due. And when they come due, this is now the late 1920s, Americans are unable to pay them back. This is going to lead us to the bank failures, and that will be 2.5. So that sets up 2.5. 2.5 is the Great Depression. And this is especially relevant. One of the things I wanted to just touch base on in this video is the essays, especially essay 1. Well, essay 2 is really an Epoch 3, and I'll deal with it then. This is an essay 2. Essay 2, in rough and ready terms, I don't have the syllabus sitting here in front of me, but I remember what it is. Essay 2 has to do with what caused the Great Depression, what were the effects of the Great Depression, and what was done to alleviate the Great Depression. This will all basically be in 2.5. Okay, it's also on the web links for weeks 7 and 8, and okay. Now, so in rough and ready terms, what causes it is what we've just been talking about, and what we'll talk about in the lectures. I'm just doing this as an introduction. You'll get all of this in the lectures. So don't, if you're a little bit lost, don't let it throw you. And then what's done to alleviate it is, of course, the advent of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deals. There's 2 New Deals. There's the first. They lump them together. In the web links that we look at, they lump them together as the New Deal. But there's actually 2 that are launched. Launches the first New Deal, and it goes okay, but then in 35 and 36, the economy slinks back into a recession. So he has to launch a second New Deal, which goes further. And this involves us, among other things, what we're going to be introduced to here is what's known as Keynesian economics, which calls for large government intervention in the economy to stimulate the economy. And what we're going to look at, and I'll just explain this in basic terms and layman terms, and then we'll go into it in more length in the PowerPoint lectures. A raging debate is going to come up in the 1930s. Now, a few things stand as factual. Okay, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, by a considerable margin, the most effective president in American history. Now, what we mean by effective is it doesn't matter whether you like what he did or didn't like what he did. Okay? What matters is that in his first 100 days in office, he accomplished more than any other president, either prior to him or after him. As it works out, the Obama administration has been one of the least effective presidencies in terms of what it's accomplished. In the 6 years now that Obama's been in power, the only really operative thing that he's accomplished was the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. Roosevelt, in his first 100 days, will enact dozens of pieces of legislation in an attempt to alleviate the Great Depression. And so whether you agree with him or not, he was a very effective president. Now, in terms of agreement with him or not, it involves us in one of the great economic debates. Okay? And we'll get into it at length. Just to introduce it now, it has to do with production possibility curves, if you're familiar with those from Survey of Economics or Micro or Macro. Okay, you start off with the nation's productive capacity, maximum capacity. They're using full tilt, all resources at their disposal. Okay, well, when the economy slinks into a recession, the first thing that happens is what? First thing that happens, they lay workers off. Okay, well, that means that your productive capacity is going to be unused. You're going to have machines that aren't being operated because you've fired the guys operating them because you're on an economic downturn. That means you're working within the PPC. Well, what the Roosevelt administration's New Deal is going to do is attempt to put people back to work, okay, to drive back towards maximum productive capacity, which makes sense. The problem is that what he does has very little effect on long-term growth. It doesn't actually push the PPC outward. It doesn't actually increase productive capacity. Now, of course, what the Keynesians argue and what Roosevelt's argue is, well, why in the hell would I want to do that? Why would you want to invest money in increasing your productive capacity when you're not using the capacity you already have? What the monetarists argue is you always have to increase that productive capacity. Okay, because even if you're working, because it's not in absolute terms, it's a percentage. Okay, if you have a productive capacity of say $1 million, and you're working at 60%, if you invest, okay, and drive that productive capacity to $1.5 million, okay, and you're working at 60%, you're at 900,000, okay, that's 90% of the old maximum. So that's why you want to keep doing it, because it's based on a percentage of use, not as absolute terms, whereas the Keynesians and the Roosevelt administration deal with it in absolute terms. Okay, and that's the raging debate. I know that's a very intellectual, geeky debate that we get into, and that's why I don't go anymore to these economics conferences, because we go to economics conferences, we get into this debate, and it always ends up with a fist fight between the monetarists, which I am, and the Keynesians. And the Keynesians aren't very good at fighting. They're really kind of just sissies when all is said and done. So I end up kicking the hell out of a few Keynesians, and then the police are called in. It's an ugly scene. It's an ugly scene. So we don't go anymore. But no, I'm kidding you. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm a pacifist. I promise. Okay. So that's 2.5, and then 2.6, of course, will be what finally does alleviate the Great Depression at length, is the Second World War. And we'll look at the Second World War at some length, not at a great length. If you want to look at World War II at great length, you would take Professor Donaldson's World War II class here at RMU. What we're interested in is the Pacific and Atlantic theaters, and we're going to make use of something that I really want to familiarize you with. You'll see web links for it on the PowerPoints in 2.6. It's www.historyanimated.com. It has animated graphics of all of the campaigns and tactics and things like that, and we'll make some use of that. The problem is that that website is still building itself, and so it doesn't have World War II in the Atlantic. It doesn't have the European theater. It has the Pacific theater in great detail and really well done. But that'll be 2.6. Now that'll cover us. I might have to make some adjustments in terms of what we're doing per week. But right now, it looks like in week 5, 2-1-2-2. In week 6, 2-3-2-4. In week 7, 2-5. And then in week 8, 2-6. Okay, so again, 4 weeks. And that brings us to spring break. So spring break, when spring breaks hits, we'll be done with the Second World War. And then the remainder of the class, from weeks 10 through 15, will be more modern stuff. After World War II, all the way to yesterday. Okay? Usually when I do History 2, when I've done History 2 in the past, I have a tendency to emphasize the earlier periods a little bit too much at the expense of the later periods, and I think that we'll focus a little bit more this time, because it's been a little bit more interesting, particularly of late, to focus on latter 20th century history. So that'll be in Epoch 3. Now, that has to do with, I mentioned the essays, I mentioned the organization of the Epoch. The one thing I haven't touched on yet that I want to touch on now is the quizzes and how they've been going. Generally, they're going all right. We're holding our own. We're doing okay. Some of us are having some difficulties that we need to address in terms of studying. And there's just a few things. The first thing that I want to reiterate, I mentioned this in the introductory video to the course. When I write the quiz questions, okay, this is the thing about an online course. There are ways, okay, I can, if I want to, set it up so that I can actually monitor you when you take the quiz. That would make sure you're not looking at any materials or doing anything like that. I've chosen not to do that. Okay? Instead, it's anticipated when you take the quiz that you have access to all classroom materials. Strategically, probably the best way to go about it is what you have with each of the lectures. Okay? We've had them so far through the ones in the first effort. We'll have them again in the twos with Epoch 2. Is you have PowerPoints, which are like PowerPoints that you have on-ground classes all the time. In my class, we have them all the time, which are just PowerPoints. It's just a PowerPoint presentation, no narration, no anything. Okay? And then you also have, coincidentally with that, kind of in conjunction with that, a narrated PowerPoint lecture that is linked up with YouTube. Okay? We've hopefully fallen into the habit of using both of these. Well, the idea is take 5 minutes, maybe 10. Print out those PowerPoint slides, not the ones with the narration. The PowerPoint slides that are on Blackboard, that are just the PowerPoints. Okay? Print those out and do it. Set your printer so that it prints 3 per page, so that it has some space for notes over there. Then you have the PowerPoints in front of you. You listen to the lecture. As you listen to the lecture, you can take notes. And I'm hoping that it's understood, which it should be, that for example, in the second epoch, the one that's on the First World War, because I went into some background, is an hour long. It's an hour long lecture, which isn't too much. I mean, that's what a normal class is. A normal class is 50 minutes. It's anticipated that you intuitively know this. You don't have to watch the thing all at once. You watch it for 10 or 15 minutes, take notes down, and say, I got to take a break. I mean, how nice would that be? I don't know how many of you guys have ever endured one of those 3-hour night classes. Okay? How nice would that be if, you're sitting there and after 20 minutes into the class, you're like, you know what, buzz, and we're going to take a little break here. I'm going to go get myself a snack, maybe have a smoke, do something else, come back, do it again. Okay, that way my concentration doesn't get snapped. You can play them backwards, forwards. You can punch in at any time in the lecture, replay things. So I'm hoping that that's what's going on here. Okay. Then, in addition to that, we look at the web links for the week. Okay. Print them out. I don't know. Maybe just take notes on them. But then, when you go to sit and take the quiz, first study that stuff up. It shouldn't take more than maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours tops, studying that stuff up. And then get all the materials together with you at your desk, with your laptop, whatever, and then go to take the quiz. That way you have some understanding of what's going on, where it is, and you know where the information is. I think in week 3, we made a mistake. I think we went back, I could tell in week 1, it looked like some people didn't bother. They said, oh, okay, basically this test is open note, open book, we can do whatever we want. They went in to take it, and they just didn't have the time for it. Okay, you only got 30 minutes on the thing. So that's just not going to work. You got to know where the material is and have some basic understanding of it. And I think that some people went back to that in week 3, because week 2 we did real well. It was a little bit easier quiz, I think, so people went crazy with it. And then in week 3 they fell back. See, more than anything else, the reason, and I mentioned this in the introductory video, the reason that we're doing these quizzes, the way we're doing them every week, is the main difference between a successful student and an unsuccessful student is discipline. This requires habitual discipline. Hopefully by now, we're now entering into the 5th week, hopefully by now, you have established a kind of standard operating procedure, a routine with this class, where you download the PowerPoints, you watch the lectures, you take the notes on things, you contact me, email, whatever, phone call, whatever. Okay, you see me on campus. I'm on campus. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I mean, I think I did. I'm on campus. I usually arrive at campus Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I teach geography. I usually arrive on campus a little bit before 1 o'clock, usually about 1:45, and then I teach at 1:35 or 1:45 till 2:35. So that's my office hour, and you are, of course, for those of you who are traditional students, you're free to come in and see me at any time. I'm in the Nicholson Center. And I used to be downstairs, but they do too much stuff down there. So now, where I am in the Nicholson Center is upstairs, outside of my classroom. It's outside of the Education Social Science Department, and it's outside of Nicholson room to 415, which is where I do my geography. But you can always try to, we can arrange times to meet. And so that's kind of, and then in terms of developing this routine, we print out the PowerPoints, we look at the web links, we listen to the lectures, we take notes, we study it up, and then we go take our quiz. We have all of our materials in front of us, and so I should think that would be okay. Because questions, if you paid attention to the lectures and if you've looked at all the PowerPoints and everything, they're not terribly difficult. Some of them are more difficult than others, but right now we're doing okay. Right now we're except for a couple on the margins, we're doing where we should be. And of course, we have this essay coming up, and as I mentioned in the introductory video, as I mentioned in the email that I sent you when I made the assignments for Essay 1, those who are not assigned Essay 1, and it had a list of all the people assigned Essay 1, those who are not assigned Essay 1 are kind of automatically assigned Essay 2, because we're splitting the class in half. And so they'll be in Essay 2, and anyone that's assigned Essay 2 can, at their leisure, do Essay 1 for extra credit. It's a maximum of 50 points of extra credit available. It's 100 points if it's assigned. It's a maximum of 50 points, which doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get 50 points. And I think that's all I want to do in the introduction to Epoch II. We're going to cover from essentially the Spanish-American War through the Second World War. And so we'll have some fun with it. It's going to end as the first one did. The first one ended on a crescendo with the economy melting down. This one's going to end on a double crescendo. We're going to have the economy melting down in the 30s, and then we're going to have the Second World War that's going to end us up here. And so, okay, look for the PowerPoints. They're going to be posted. I'm planning today on finishing up 2.5 and maybe even 2.6 if I have the time. Maybe tomorrow 2.6. Then we should be good to spring break, and then we'll get on to Epoch 3. Thanks.